What's the weakest finger in your hand? Show me, yeah, the pinky. And what's the most popular letter of the alphabet? Hey, that's right. So who said that? You did, right? So why is it that the original designers of the keyboard chose to put the most popular letter A way over in that awkward place to be struck by the baby finger? Why did they do that? Does anybody know? She knows. Why? That's correct. The original designers of the keyboard put the vowels, the popular letters, in easy to get to places, right? But what happened is because the original keyboard was what? A typewriter, for those that never heard of that, a typewriter, right? Which had all kinds of levers. So as people got good at it, all the letters started to jam up so that they went back to the designers and said, you got to fix this problem. So what they did is they moved our popular letters to hard to get to places so they could slow the typists down. Well, we have electric keyboards for years. And why is it that we continue with that legacy process of putting that crazy keyboard together? Why is that? Well, is it because we don't want to change? But I think it's actually because we become blinded to it. We're so used to it that we wouldn't even know the difference. In fact, there's a term for that kind of blindness, and it's called a scotoma. And it's a medical term, and it's also a psychological term that says that it's sort of like failure to see what's before our very eyes, a scotoma. And I believe that all transformation and innovation occurs when we can kind of peel away that scotoma and see things in a completely different way. So what I'm going to talk today about is digital transformation in GIS in the utility industry. But a lot of it I want to talk about is the way we think about things in kind of a new kind of way. So I'm going to talk about this. Does anybody know what this thing is? It's an how many people have even, yeah, he knows. It's an 8-track tape, right? Now you still use it, right? Yep. I'd like to, it's probably worth a few bucks, right? So an 8-track tape is what? An analog device, right? So how many people remember this thing? Anybody know what this is? It's a Sony Discman, right? It's digital. So let me ask you this question. When I moved from this analog device to this digital device, is that digital transformation? Is it? What's the answer? There's only 2 answers, right? No, it's not digital transformation. And the reason why it's not digital transformation is because we haven't changed our behavior, right? So look at that thing on the slide. What is that? It's a bunch of CD racks, right? Before that, it was a bunch of cassette racks. And before that, it was a bunch of 8-track racks. So the way in which we bought music, the way in which we kind of collected music really hasn't changed from 8 tracks to record, you know, all of that sort of stuff. Digital transformation is different. What I call the movement from analog to this to that is a digital transition. We're just kind of migrating, but we're not really changing the way we think about our life, about work. So as we talk about digital transformation, there are good examples of companies who have literally transformed the way they think about work or business or pleasure. Now, how many people remember this triptych thing, right? Remember that? You open that thing and it's a long thing. Well, Waze is a new technology that uses GPS. Well, GPS is a digital transition because we really haven't significantly changed behavior, but a company like Waze, they know where you're going. I was using Waze to go to the Baseball Hall of Fame. And along the way, it said, oh, by the way, there's a nice little souvenir shop. How did it know I needed a souvenir shop? Well, because you're going to the Baseball Hall of Fame. So it knew where traffic jams were. It knew where police were hiding out. Of course, I would never speed, but if I ever did, I would use Waze to do that. Another really good example of digital transformation is the Uber. I was in Japan recently, and they don't have Uber there. And it was kind of weird. I was kind of like used to it. So what I had to do, and it was a little drizzly, and I had a suit like this on, and I had to go out in the street and kind of wave down the taxi, and then they pulled over. What Uber did is completely reversed the equation. Instead of you going to the cab or seeking out a cab, the cab comes to you. A very simple transformation, but it completely changed not just the way in which we deal with like rides, but it really changed the whole industry. So that's what Uber did. And the granddaddy of all digital transformations was Mr. Steve Jobs, right? The iPhone, remember the Polaroid thing? Not only did that change a phone or a camera, it's an encyclopedia, it's a music player, it's a video, I mean, it's like, it changes everything. So that was truly digital transformation. So that's kind of where my head is when we think about applying technology to any kind of problem. It isn't just applying the technology to something that we already do. We need to think about behavior, how we behave, what our workflow is. That's really digital transformation. So I think there are three elements to digital transformation, and all three kind of have to occur, or at least two of the three. And the first is a technology. In other words, without the technology, probably it won't occur. In the case of Steve Jobs, it was the iTunes platform. In the case of Uber, it was the platform of mapping, and Waze also mapping plus GPS. So the technology has to be there. But the second piece is about workflow, about behavior. We have to think about things in an entirely new way. I was on the phone this weekend because I lost my internet service. So I called a company named Frontier Communications. But I had to use my cell phone to call them because my landline phone was not working because it was on the internet. And I waited 20 minutes. You would think there would be a way in which I could deal with that Frontier Communications in a much more effective way. They eventually solved my problem, and it wasn't even in my house. So after 2 or 3 days, they said, oh yeah, it's in the back office. So they weren't really exhibiting digital transformation, even though they're a high-tech company. So the workflow was different, and the business model can be substantially different. Now, let's talk about technology. And I believe one of the really components of technological change that has occurred over the last 5 years is this notion of a platform. Now, we hear that kind of bandied about. We have platforms. We hear platforms, everything, platforms. What is a platform but what Phil Simon in his book, The Age of the Platform, says that it allows people to reach and connect with one another and obtain information. Not like in 2 weeks, but like right now. So when you use Facebook, and everybody here I'm sure uses Facebook, is that a technology to store pictures, right? I mean, you could say, well, it's a place to put pictures. No, it's a place to share information and get information. So the notion of a platform is very simple. It's the ability to connect with one another to get information or products or services. So people like Amazon and Facebook and Instagram and Spotify, they all think about things in terms of a platform. iTunes is one of the best notions of a platform. When I think about the music industry again, it reminds me of a story or of a time when I needed to hear a song for some odd reason. You know how you get songs in your mind. And the song was called Got to Get You Into My Life. Did anybody ever hear that song? By say it. The Beatles, no, not first. I'm a Beatles fan. It's the Beatles, right? So I wanted to hear that song. But I couldn't remember what album it was on, right? Does anybody remember? I don't know what it was. Revolver or Rubber Soul or something like that. So I knew I had it. I bought it a long time ago. I went into my garage, opened up a box of CDs. I'm like poking through there. I can't find it. Oh, wait. Forget that. Alexa, play Got to Get You Into My Life. Boom. It's right there. That's true digital transformation. And when we think about our lives and so forth, the technology about that is a platform. And oftentimes it's enabled by other kinds of technology. So thinking about a platform, we're really in the third platform today, right? The first platform was like mainframe computers and maybe mini computers, and you had millions of users and thousands of apps. Today we're in the third platform, which is billions of users, mobile devices, mobile, cloud, big data, social, millions and millions of apps. So all of these digital transformations we see today are technology driven by a platform, oftentimes enabled by the cloud, big data and analytics and all that sort of stuff. So that's really what it is. So modern platforms have kind of characteristics. One, they respect identity. They know who you are, right, for all your stuff. They work on any device. How many people have mobile Facebook? Yeah, but no, everybody's got Facebook. It doesn't matter. It's not who cares? It's not on mobile. So we think about mobile as kind of a separate thing. No, it's all one thing. So anything we do in technology today of a platform, it really doesn't matter what. So it's on any device, anytime, anywhere. That's what a platform allows you to do. External data, often, many times. Share data with other platforms. When I go tweet something, LinkedIn knows about it and Facebook knows about it. So these platforms have to collaborate and coordinate with one another. Allows consumers to be providers of information. We're called crowdsourcing. We're providing that. So there's a platform, always on, scale automatically, have security built in, and sometimes have deployment and hybrid deployments and so forth. That's what a platform is. So when we think about digital transformation, I really think this notion of this third platform, this third wave of platform, is really fundamental to making that kind of shift. Okay, so let's talk about workflow and behavior. Now, I deal in the utility industry, and the utility industry has at least 120 years of existence, maybe even more. So their workflows and their behaviors are really solidly entrenched. I imagine a university is the same way, right? Things that sort of happen and continue to happen, and people filling out forms and doing all kinds of crazy stuff like that. So what I want you to do is I want to illustrate this kind of behavior thing with a test. So I'm going to give you a quiz. So what I'd like you to do is to read this slide in your head voice, all right? Just read that slide in your head voice, all right? Take a few minutes. All right, now what I'd like you to do, if everybody done, right? Now I want you to count the number of F's on that slide for me. Okay? All right, how many F's? 3, you said 3. How many else? And who else? How many counted 3s? All right. Anybody count anything else? Somebody got 4. How did you see 3 and he saw 4? Well, let me show you what happens. Nobody's owning up to any of this, right? So there's the 3 F's, right? Right? Everybody sees that, right? Okay, how many people saw those F's? Right? Not many, I bet. No. What happened? Where did those 3 F's? Did I just switch the slide? No, because we become programmed to think certain ways. And the reason why you didn't catch those other F's is why? Because of is pronounced of, like a V, right? You saw the F as a V. So this notion of digital transformation and this scotoma is that we've become so programmed to do things and see things in a certain way that we can't see things in a different sort of way. All right, so finally, one of the things I think about in a workflow is that utilities and many other industries are a combination of high tech and ancient rituals. Things that we do all the time. And so we've applied the technology to things that the old way. And I see this so many times. When I was with a power company, I was actually giving a workshop and on GIS, of course, and they asked me, Bill, can you help out a problem not related to GIS, but it's sort of a workflow? And I said, okay, what is it? They said, when a customer contacts us for a new service or a new electric service, it takes a long time for the time they contact us to actually get the service. And I said, well, how long does it take? And they said, 256.5 days. And I said in my head voice, that seems awful long. And the reason why it's awful long is because they took the technology they have. They have GIS, not our GIS, but they have GIS, they have real-time systems, and they have control boards, and they have automation, and they have computers. They have everything they could possibly need, and yet it takes 256.5 days from when somebody contacts them to get service. So I said, well, how do they contact you? Well, they drive to our service center from 10 to 4, but on Tuesdays to Thursdays. I said, well, that's part of the problem. And by the way, this city was in one of the worst traffic cities in the world. It was not in the United States. So they force people to go to the service center to get service. And I said, well, what happens when they get to the service center? What if there's a bunch of people in there? And they said, well, they just wait in line. And the notion is that you have technology. Why wouldn't somebody in the middle of the night be able to go online on their GIS and say, I want to have service to go from here to here? And they said, well, I don't think our customers would like that. But it takes 256 days to get your service. Wouldn't you really like that better? So the workflow is fundamentally part of the culture of the organization, even though they have the technology to solve it. So a simple thing to do would be to just have them go online, pay their service fee online, get the service and deliver the service the next day. I said, you can go from 256.5 days on average to 1 day. And they said, you're crazy. But not really, because again, they're so entrenched. Anybody, you know what this is? This is their work. They stack it up in folders, and we're still paper-driven today. Utilities, telephone companies, gas companies, still driven by paper. And yet, that paper oftentimes is a printout from what? A computer. And so they're using all of this technology, and they're still printing it out, especially GIS. They print out maps. You know that, right? They print out the maps. We produce all this technology. That's digital transition, paper to digital. But then the workflow continues. Well, how are you going to get that paper to the people? You print out a map. Simple. That's how they do it. So the last one is about business. So digital transformation is work, is technology, workflow, and business. And some businesses are completely transformed, and some businesses simply go out of business. Remember, does anybody remember this? Howard Johnson's? How many people remember that? Few. Remember they were on every freeway? What happened to them? Why did they go out of business? Well, because they thought people were coming to a restaurant. But no, they were coming to grab a hamburger. So Burger King basically changed the whole workflow, changed the whole business. And what they did is they used a platform technology to do it. People come in, they make their order, it's the cooks, they blah, 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 they get it right out the door. Actually, In-N-Out Burger was even earlier than Burger King, I think. How about this? So the utility business that I'm in, are they facing any kind of challenges? I mean, is there any issues with utilities? They're always going to be there. Everything is going to be the same. No problem. Uh-oh. What about wind energy? What about that? Solar. Holy crap. Is that going to change our industry substantially? Yes. And what's that got to do with GIS and technology? Well, now solar is all distributed. It's really interesting to know where these things are. So there's a whole kind of technology building around solar energy, and the utility industries have to be very careful that they adapt to this new technology. Otherwise, they're going to face the same fate as Howard Johnson's and Polaroid. Remember them? Kodak. All these people no longer exist. Uh-oh. Boy, that slide got messed up. But anyway, so I'm going to talk about GIS. And there are really three elements of GIS, all about platform. And it should say, because it did say in my office, I swear it did, on my old computer, platform of record, platform of engagement, and platform of insight. So what's the first word that comes to mind when you hear the term GIS? And don't say gas-insulated switchgear. What's the first word that comes to mind when I say the term GIS? Well, global, but yeah, but how about something even more fundamental? Maps, that's right. So I think there's a notion that GIS is about making maps. Well, it is, of course. But is that all? Because if that's the case, let's plot them out and give them to people on paper, big paper. Fold them up and really use these maps. Great. So anybody know who that guy is? All right. How about this? How many people know who that little guy is? Yeah, from Dora the Explorer, right? Does anybody have the courage to sing the little tune? Come on, somebody do it. There you go, good. I'm the map, right? I'm the map. So we think about maps in a very, well, it's a map, it's a physical map. And so GIS is a technology not about maps, but it can be about transformation. In fact, it can be about discovering something about your world that you didn't know about. So here's an example of a map. That's a map that was produced in 1927 by a power company. And it has, power lines like this, houses, there's poles, there's a pole. And then, so what we've done over the years is that power companies have taken these maps, and we've got to convert them to GIS. They do. They convert them to GIS. And guess what? They look just like the old maps, right? In fact, when I was with the power company, people just loved those old maps, and so they really forced us to make sure that they looked like the old maps, to the point where I was like, I wonder if we could get a symbol for this little tear here. Let's make a coffee stain symbol. That would be really good. So the notion of digital transformation really is inhibited by the culture of wanting things to be the way they are. And that happens in utilities all the time. To the point, it's not just about the plotting, but they also have the practice. The workflow is they print these beautiful maps and they stick them up on the wall. And they do that really for three reasons, right? Communication of what's going on, collaboration with other people, and coordination of activities. The problem is that the wall is a barrier to communication, collaboration, and coordination because unless I'm in this room, I can't do anything with it. But you think about Facebook and Instagram, there's all kinds of this collaboration technology going on. That's really the key. That's really what happens. And that's really what we're changing in our company. And in fact, what we're really suggesting, this system of record, is a digital twin. It's not, yes, it's produced in a map, but it's also showing you the real world as it is in technology. It's called a digital twin, and that's really the notion of a system of record, the digital twin. And here's an example of some. So instead of looking at a map, we're defining what things like transformers are going to look like in their real connectivity, or how it really looks on a map. So that's the idea of a system of record, capturing all your information, not so we can make a beautiful map, but we can manage all our assets more effectively. But that's only one part of the story. So I want to talk about the platform itself. This is a GIS platform, and I'm trying not to be. It's sort of an Esri one, but I kind of like this because it really talks about what a GIS platform really is in the context of system of engagement and system of record and system of insight. So the classic old-fashioned GIS, or what I would say the GIS that many people use today, is storing all of their facilities like wires and cables and valves and pipes and you know, if I'm in a park, all the furniture. And we've been doing that for a long time. But we typically take that data and we plot it out on a physical map, or we maybe, you know, do it summary, or we maybe add stuff up. But I don't want to minimize that. That's really important. And so what many technology people are doing, including Esri today, is making that data much more realistic. Because in effect, a map is an abstraction of reality, right? It's not really how things are, but it's an abstraction that people understand. And I think as we move forward, that abstraction will become more and more like reality, like a 3D map. And that's where all of us are going. But anyway, so this is the system of record. So that's an important piece of the platform. The problem is that data, that record stuff, is kind of trapped within the technology. So we want to get it out. This piece represents the web and information that comes from other places, like from other companies or from, I don't know, other services, we call it, like weather and telling what's going on, maybe like coming from lightning or traffic and so forth. So this is this notion of getting information from other places. Why would that be important from a utility? Utilities know what they're doing. They don't need anything else. They don't need any help. Well, when I was working for operations, for electric operations, I had this nasty habit. A nasty habit. You know what's this from? The movie Cars, right? Do you remember what happened? He went down the street and he ripped up the street and made a big mess, and then they get this big paving thing. So this always reminded me of a very negative thing that happened to me when I was with the power company. We always had this nasty habit of digging up the street, putting a trench for a cable, the day after the city paves the street. Not the day before, but the day after. And so why did we do that? Well, we just wanted to irritate the city, which we did regularly. I remember I was once at a city council meeting of the city I grew up in. So the city councils I probably went to high school with. Mr. Meehan, why do you always dig up the streets? And after you pave the street, and we said, well, we do it because, you know, we didn't know and we never really heard that you were going to dig up the street or pave the street, all that sort of stuff. In fact, what we used to do, by the way, was after we dug the trench on this beautifully new paved street, we would put what's called cold patch on the trench. You know what that's like. You know, and what happens when you drive your car over it, all these little pebbles start to get caught in your wheel well in your brand new Lexus, and it's awful. So they were really mad at us. But what could we have done differently? If we think back to this platform thing, if we had data from the city, a map-based data that shows where the city was going to pave, and we could subscribe to it using a service, not a file, but just look into the city's GIS and put it over the places that we're going to dig. You're going to pave, I'm going to dig, the water company is going to dig, I'm going to pave, we're all going to go together. And then ask the question of the GIS, show me those places in the city where we're going to pave and we're going to dig. Simple, simple. But why can't we do that? Well, because we have cultural barriers. There's no technology barrier at all. And that's really one of the advantages of GIS, this notion of communication, collaboration, and coordination. And what happens is driven by the infrastructure, which typically uses the cloud, doesn't have to, but it typically uses the cloud to allow this kind of services to happen. When you're using Facebook, you're using services, you know, because your neighbor, your friend, your granddaughter is Facebooking you, and it's all happening in real time. But we're not plotting that out. It all happens together. It takes data from many, many different sources. And then it really publishes that data or allows that data to be viewed on any device. Doesn't matter. A tablet or a desktop or a mobile device or whatever we come out next, a watch or some kind of hologram, it's going to happen. It doesn't matter. It's all done through services. And the notion of this GIS platform is very similar to what the notion of any platform, like Phil Simon said in his book, Age of the Platform. Communication, collaboration, and coordination. Not really hard science, but it can be based on science, but it's based on simple, simple things. And if you don't do that, if you're a power company that doesn't know how to collaborate, coordinate, and communicate, this happens. Right? Now, I remember another bad experience that I had when I sent out a crew on overtime on Saturday, and they had to lay a cable. And actually, how did they do that? They have to dig up the street. So they're jackhammering, blah, 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 blah. But what happened was that they were jackhammering in front of a church during a wedding. So the video of the wedding had the wedding march offset by the jackhammering. So I got a nasty gram from the mother-in-law, the mother of the bride, rather. And why did you do that? Well, I said, just do the wedding over, right? Just do it some other day. It's too late. But what could have happened, and what can happen with technology, what if we had just, as a company, published on our website a live map that shows where all of the digging is going to occur, and published that and publicized it, that if you're going to have an event, a grand opening, and there's going to be trucks hanging around, you should know about that. So that's really this notion of a platform. See, that's what the spatial component is. So that's really a piece of it. And this is also kind of our mobile strategy. See, again, if we were to take the idea of getting GIS out into the field, maybe that's what we would have thought about, right? That's kind of the notion. We've got to change the culture. We've got to peel away those scotomas and think of things in a whole new way, an entrepreneurial way, an innovative way. And we see sometimes people love to produce lots of data on lots of maps, on everything, and yet no information. So what I want to talk about next is a story about my friend Stanley. Well, Stanley was a manager of the electric operations, the people who go and do all of the work. You've seen him with the trucks and stuff. So every day, Stanley had to make a decision. So when the crews came back from their regular day of work, Stanley had to decide, do I send the crews on overtime, or do I keep them, or do some combination? Now, I ran the power company in Massachusetts and New England where, snow and hurricanes and all kinds of bad stuff. So you never knew what was going to happen. It always seemed to happen at night. So, but what Stanley would do is he'd go out, like we had these docks where the trucks came up, and he would smell the air. And he would check with his supervisor. He knew where there were problems because he'd been in the utility for years and years. And he would then analyze it. He would collect all this information in his head. And he would organize that information by location. And then he would make a decision. He'd come into my office and say, Bill, we're going to keep 3 crews or 5 crews, or no, send them all home. And in all of the years that I knew Stanley, he was almost always right. But what was he doing in his head? He was doing a scientific exercise called spatial analysis. Then Stanley retired. And all of that data, all of that intuition, all of that stuff simply walked out the door. And so what the other component of GIS is called the system of insight. So what are we going to do with all of the Stanleys walking out the door? Well, we've got science and technology together in the form of spatial analysis, which takes layers of information and puts them together to form data-driven decisions, like where do I put a new Starbucks, or where do I put a new electric line, or where are there places in my infrastructure where a single event could take down the whole system, or where are there going to be floods? What if we took a flood map that is probably kept in somebody's cabinet someplace, but what if we took a real-time service from flood maps and overlaid that with the electrical system? We could discover where there are places that are going to be flooded, like out in Hurricane Sandy. A lot of these electric facilities were flooded. Why? But they had the data. They just didn't know how to put it together and analyze it using spatial analytics. And there are many, many tools built within GIS, and I guarantee you that of all of the tools that are in the Esri GIS and other GISs, that only a small percentage of those tools are actually used to drive data-driven decisions. So it's not a great, I'm sorry, it's a bad imagery here, but the idea here is that these are all of the transmission lines in Southern California, and they're just simply analyzed by which are the ones that are at higher risk to fail versus the lower risk of failing. And that gives me tremendous insight in where to spend my limited resources. So it's kind of vulnerability analysis, and I can do that in any kind of system, whether it's a transportation system, electric, gas, water, you name it. Here's a great example of using spatial analytics. Let's say I want to figure out where to put solar. Well, I can take some things like mean rainfall, mean temperature, elevation, land cover, and do an analysis and actually create a solar site suitability. It's just using spatial analysis to help me make decisions that I couldn't otherwise make made by using Stanley's intuition. It requires much more science. So really, GIS is a platform for utilities using those 3 C's I like: collaboration, communication, and coordination. And really about data management, sharing, apps for everybody, integration, and analytics is probably my favorite one, because it really helps me to understand the business and really makes me to save money for my company. So when I think about an electric company or any other companies, there's really 4 major things that happen. And when I had a boss named Russ, and he said, Bill, there are only 4 things you need to know about running an electric company: make money, keep customers happy, keep employees safe, and stay the hell out of trouble. And so what he was getting at is those are the 4 major elements of what a utility has to do. And stay in business, too, because that would be critical. Because I think we've got to be careful about all our businesses to make sure we don't go out of business. So the other piece that's coming along, you've heard this term IoT, Internet of Things. So what we're seeing is an explosion of sensors. But all of those sensors are somewhere. They're in location. So we're now seeing a tremendous excitement about bringing those sensors into a GIS and be able to do, not just show where they are, but show how they relate to other things. Not just so that it's interesting, so that we can do something, make decisions to save money, to keep customers happy, to keep employees safe, and to comply with the rules and regulations of the world. So I want to kind of end this on 2 pieces. One is how this notion of the GIS as a platform can really improve the way in which we manage emergencies, particularly, we've seen these things in Texas and in Florida and in the Thomas Fire up in California, how this notion of collaboration really, really makes a difference. And so we think about, going back here, this is a plan that we put together similar to what we put together at Boston Edison, all paper-based on forms. Forms were driving everybody crazy. But that's no longer the case anymore, using GIS. So here's all of the things that happen during a power failure or when we get a storm. It's all about union work rules and routing and logistics and all kinds of stuff. So it's really, really difficult. And we use all kinds of technology, just like that company that had 265.5 days, but we don't put the pieces together. We're seeing more and more, though, that utilities are recognizing during a major storm or a major emergency that they need to have this level of collaboration and spatial analysis. Where are the places that are going to cause a problem? If I do get a storm, I want to know, kind of like a guy by the name of Wayne Gretzky. Anybody know, ever heard of him? What was his famous quote? He doesn't want to know where the puck is. What does he want to know? Where it's going to be. That's what spatial analysis is going to tell me. So if a storm is coming this way and I have vulnerability up this way, I want to deploy my crews into those places that are going to have the largest impact on what's really happening. So that's really it. So here's kind of the tools that we've been used to: paper, pen, rolled up forms, and that's no longer the case. There are all kinds of emergencies that we see, from snowstorms to explosions and all kinds of stuff. Again, me with the alphabet soup here, but when you think about emergency management, it's really about 4 R's, and all of them relate to spatial technology. The first is risk mitigation. Again, figuring out, using analytics and using a system of insight, where are the places in my infrastructure that are going to be the most vulnerable to a flood or a storm or an earthquake or a fire. So knowing that, that's kind of a spatial analysis idea. The next one is called readiness, which is the storm is coming, we know that the fire is burning. How do I ready myself? How do I get myself ready for this really bad thing happening within the next few hours? And then when the storm hits, it's about response, responding to that storm using technology like, okay, damage assessment, going out with iPads or using LiDAR or drones to figure out where things are damaged so that I don't take 2 weeks. We used to take hours and hours and hours sending out people out in the field to find out where things are broken, or people calling in, there's wires hanging out. Use the technology available to us so that immediately we can assess the damage, so we can immediately understand the problem we're facing. I got a question today about Puerto Rico, and I don't understand it. I don't understand 8 months later that we still don't have everybody back in electricity, because I don't think that they use this kind of process, and I don't think they use the technology in the right sort of way. And here's a case here where recently President Trump was meeting with Texas officials, and that is a real-time situational awareness with real-time weather, real-time damage, using all of the facilities together so that we see things all in one place. And as information comes in from the field, from the outside, using iPads and iPhones, and maybe even social media, all put it together in one place. It's a dramatic change, and I think it's going to improve the way in which we manage all kinds of emergencies, because guess what? We're seeing more and more climate change. And because of that, we can then do the risk assessment in a much more effective way. And here's a case. This is showing, I think, that same hurricane where there are places where it shows high levels of risk. So using technology to help us really kind of eliminate, well, you can't eliminate this, but what we can do is increase or decrease the time that it takes to get people back, get critical services to the people who need it the most. Now, here's a case of just using GIS to do the analysis. Here's what remember Harvey, I think, happened in August of last year in Texas. So here's a case where Harvey looked like, or the coast looked like previous to Harvey, and now afterwards looking at post-Harvey. Now, we can take those two images and do what's called change detection, which then illustrates where things have changed from one place to another. That's using actually image processing and image analysis. It's a very, very powerful tool. So that's, again, part of the technology. And then it's really the workflow. The GIS platform helps me to get things, the data, the situational awareness, and the coordinated action, which is really what we need the most. Because that's really where I think situations, especially emergency management situations, fail the most. Things are just uncoordinated, like my digging up the street the day after they paved the city. It happens in a larger scale of lack of coordination, lack of communication, collaboration, and coordination. And if we think about the kind of data sources, there are 5 kinds of data sources that all can fit in with the GIS. So it's not just about authoritative sources like where things are on that system of record, like where the poles are, the wires, the valves. That's good. That's authoritative information. But we need a lot more. We need predictive information like where the storms are going to hit, where flooding is apt to occur, where lightning is apt to occur, where lightning has occurred. Then we use measured information, which is really about real-time data coming in all kinds of things, from the IoT, from real-time control systems. But oftentimes those real-time control systems are isolated in little pockets. Bringing that all together is really going to help. Experiential, I think, is based on information from people like Stanley, who knew this stuff. Because Stanley would always say, when an event happens, a major power failure, and Stanley would say, I could have told you that. Because he knew in his head. But imagine if we took a map and we just simply had Stanley and Joe and Mary and Maria circle on the map and actually have that as a source of spatial analysis, using their wisdom and insight to help us create even better decision making. And finally, community. Social media. That's real-time data that is really not used all that much for managing data. We get the social media in, we hear it, oh my goodness, look what's going on. What if we would have taken spatially enabled social media then we would get even further insights. And not just in isolation, but in together with all of these other data sources. That's really, really important. So you get things like road closures and data distribution of the data, risk and hazard analysis. This is just a quote from one of our electric folks that says, knowledge may not be as good as the power on, but it helps customers better manage the situation. Communicating directly with customers, not just by the phone. Imagine pulling up on your iPhone and showing what's going on. Because when you're out of power, you want to know where there are places to go and all that kind of stuff. So it's really about, here's my A's again. Access, awareness, and analytics. That really describes the platform. All right, wait, whoops, I got a little quiz for you. All right, ready? We'll end this in about 5 minutes. Is that good? All right. So what I want everybody to do, this is your final exam, right? I want you to read this next slide. All right, I want you to read it. This time I want you to read it out loud. And I want you to complete the phrase. Everybody ready? Go. Out loud. Oh. Where'd it go? There, read it out loud. No, you did it wrong. Do it again. Okay, all right, wait. I heard somebody say it right. Who said it right? Did you say it right? He doesn't know. No. Read it again. Read the slide, please. Read it. No, stand up and read it for me. Oh, no, you don't have to stand up and read it. A bird in the. How many people saw the two thes? Not everybody, right? And you saw it maybe the third time, right? Yeah. Again, the idea is we get programmed to do things and we miss important details, this lack of coordination. That's why when you tell somebody one thing and you tell 5 other people, it always gets lost in the translation. By having a platform technology, we transform the way we communicate and collaborate in real time. So I'm going to end with this final little story. When I meet with a customer, usually a utility customer, I ask 3 questions. What's your biggest problem? What are you doing about it? And how do you know that those 3 things, that what you're doing actually is going to solve the problem? So what's your biggest problem? What are you doing about it? And how do you know what you're doing is actually solving your problem, right? So I happened to ask this utility executive what her biggest problem was. And she told me customer satisfaction. And she continued. She said that for the past 3 years, our J.D. Power survey of customer satisfaction was below that of our neighboring utilities. The board of directors was furious, and she was told to fix it. So I said to her the second question, what are you doing about it? And she said, we're doing 3 things. We're increasing our tree trimming for better reliability, because trees cause problems with power failures, right? We're adding smart meters all over the place to give customers more whatever. And we're sending all our call center people to charm school, to a place to get more polite, because they figured their call center people were rude, I guess. So I said to her, well, how do you know that those 3 things that you're planning to do are going to solve your biggest problem? And she said, we hope so. But we hope so. So I said, are you kidding me? Your job depends on it. Well, I didn't really say it out loud. I said it in my head voice. But what I did say was, have you thought about simply taking your J.D. Power survey and putting it on a map, a digital map? And she said, well, why would I do that? Well, because if you've got bad customer satisfaction, you want to know where people are most unhappy with you, not just that generally they're unhappy. Because then you can figure out, well, have you done anything to really irritate your customers? So let's talk about the second thing you did, which was, or the thing that you did. You said you're going to increase tree trimming, right? Well, tree trimming makes everybody happy. Well, not everybody. And in fact, my experience with tree trimming is it makes most people unhappy because they go in with chainsaws. We'd come in with chainsaws blazing and, cut down all of the trees. But what if she knew that where trees were actually being cut over time, she could figure out, well, this is an area where people are unhappy and we've cut trees down. They can make a correlation to that. Find out where people are unhappy and where we cut down trees. And so we could say, well, that's not going to do it. Maybe what I would do is I would change my approach and maybe deal with things on a more individual basis. Also, smart meters. People think smart meters are spying on you. So not everybody's happy with smart meters either. Same thing. Let's take a look at customer satisfaction in relationship to smart meters. And we could then maybe help solve that problem. And what if we then took social media like tweets and put it together on this map and coordinated it, then we could listen to our customers in relationship to their satisfaction, in relationship to the things that we have done. So we're using spatial technology to transform the way we think about customer satisfaction in a way that is relatively simple and easy to do today with today's technology. All of these social media platforms are spatially enabled. Pull them together, do an analysis on them, answer the question, where are there bad tweets, where are there customer dissatisfied, and where have we done stuff to really irritate them. So that is digital transformation in the simplest sort of way. And when you think about a utility, they really have to worry about this, given that the trends in utilities are going to be more and more threatened by things like social and solar panels and so forth. So when we think about how we can approach customer satisfaction or a problem and we don't use spatial technology, we're going to change the conversation from we hope so. By using spatial technology, we'll change the conversation from we hope so to we know so. Thank you.